Mr. Chairman, let me first walk you through the process that the committee took. In the first, on that handout, you will see item number 1 was our first step was determining the 2011 base. Fairly self-explanatory on the points, but for the audience and for those that are listening, I'll walk us through that. First item on any budget base, whether it's public schools or any other entity, Senator Andresen knows this as well as anybody, is you back out all of the one-time funds and the base adjustments that are necessary. Because of the way we passed last year's public schools budget, just by removing the one-time money, the stimulus dollars, that created a salary reduction or a decrease in the amount of money appropriated to public school districts for salaries in the amount of 4% for teachers, 4% for classified staff, and 6.5% reduction for administrators. Again, that's due to decisions that were made previously, and that funding previously had been backfilled with stimulus dollars. That then created a general fund of $1,226,000,000, dedicated funds of $64 million, federal funds of $215 million, for a total of $1,506 million. Step 2 is then we add the program maintenance costs, or in this case, additional of 140 additional support units for both the support unit side and the transportation side. You may recall that last year we recommended 140 additional support units. We actually exceeded those. This would be an additional 140 at whatever number we actually end up ending with. At this point in time, I believe we're running at about 153 additional support units. The difference, of course, is trued up at the end of the year with the use of the public schools stabilization account, and then we start with fiscal year 11 with the new base, new number of support units, and we're projecting an additional increase of support units of 140. We then we're required to make the adjustments, and what's sort of missing in between step 2 and step 3. In the overall public schools budget, or in the overall state budget, after we had backed out all the one-time expenditures and all of the one-time money, that gave us a deficit between the amount of money that we were expected to receive and the amount of money that was necessary. That created a deficit, and we took that deficit and split it in half. Essentially, public schools has been somewhere between 48 and 53% of the state budget. We took that deficit and split it in half and gave the half of that shortfall to public schools. The other remaining half of the shortfall has to be picked up by other state agencies, health and welfare, corrections, etc. That adjustment made it necessary for our public schools budget to be at $1,214,000,000. Anything higher than that number would have created other entities to take on a larger share of the deficit. In order to achieve that number, we then did the following steps. First, and before I get into these steps, I guess I should also explain, at that point, at arriving at that number, I convened a meeting of what I will call the stakeholders. Those stakeholders included Superintendent Luna and his staff members, the Idaho Education Association, the Idaho School Boards Association, the Idaho Superintendents Association. All of those folks were brought to the table, and we began to discuss each of these items below. Each of them, I have to tell you that at first, in all honesty, each of them were sort of staking out their territory, and the way we started the process is we said, look, let's find the areas where we can agree to. Our desire was to try and protect the classroom, try and keep teachers in the classroom, and try and provide as much flexibility as possible to the local school district. Without that effort, just by plugging in the numbers, you would have had a 32% reduction in discretionary funds, and there would have been an 8.5% overall reduction in the overall budget. We started on the first day, and the good Senator Getty was present on that first day. We started by working through each of the areas that we had agreement. If there was any one party that did not agree to an item, we set it aside and came back to it on the second meeting. And so the first day, I believe we walked away with a dozen agreements, or right at a dozen agreements, on items that could be discussed or that we could move towards discretionary. And I'll go through some of those items here in a minute. Then we started in also on some of the contentious or areas where we had disagreement. Each one of those stakeholder groups gave. There isn't one of them that can stand up here and say this is the ideal plan for them, because it's not. It's not the ideal plan for any of us. We all wish it was a higher dollar amount. We all wish that there were the choices that we're being forced to make were not there. But nonetheless, given the dollar amount that was assigned and given the situation that we were in, each of them gave to generate a proposal that is before you now. So the first step in item number 3 was we had to freeze the experience and educational portion of the salary grid. That generated somewhere, we estimate, around $10.13 million. Last year we froze the experience portion, but did not freeze the educational component. One of the reasons that you heard in the report that some were able to obtain salary increases this year was partly due to that fact, that statutorily we had not frozen the educational component. We also removed funding from the school supplies, $4.69 million, and made a general fund reduction of $6.84 million of the stimulus funds. At this point, without moving anything else around, again, you would still have a 32% discretionary fund. Those first 3 steps are what's necessary to achieve the $1,214 million budget. Then step 4. Step 4 is where we started making adjustments. The first item was the $22 million that Superintendent Luna obtained by going to the land board and asking to use the public schools earnings reserve fund. The land board had approved $22 million. We plugged those dollars into discretionary. The next step was $15 million by combining technology and textbooks. Those line items we moved to discretionary. That certainly does not prevent a school district from spending money for textbooks or for technology. If that's their most important need, they can do so. It's at their discretion. But it's no longer funded as a line item and mandatory that they be spent on those items. We also made a decision to reduce transportation costs by 10%. Currently, we reimburse at about 85% of the average for transportation costs. This will reduce that reimbursement that your districts will receive by 10%. But then that reduction shows up in the discretionary money. So if there are additional transportation needs, they can use the discretionary funds.